It is my great pleasure to introduce Joan Copjec. Joan is one of the first thinkers to have seriously introduced Lacanian thought in the Anglophone world. And personally, I have no hesitation to say that without Joan's path-breaking work, it is quite unlikely that many of us, at least of my generation, would be here today discussing the link between philosophy, psychoanalysis, and beyond. Joan's work has always been distinctly, extremely interdisciplinary. She's a film theorist, a philosopher, and obviously, last but not least, a feminist. Currently, Joan is a professor of modern culture and media at Brown University in the US. She has published extensively and is the author of what I consider two milestone books in Lacanian theory, namely Read My Desire and Imagine There's No Woman. The title of Joan's lecture today is A Cinema of Subtraction.
Thank you, Lorenzo, and thanks the organizers for inviting me. It's been, fantastic conference so far, and I will do my best to keep it that way. Let me tell you about the paper that I'm not going to present today and why. It is about the film First Case, Second Case, which Abbas Kiarostami commenced filming in January of 1979 and abruptly broke off on January 16th when the Shah fled the country in the waning days of the Iranian Revolution. Khomeini arrived from exile to Tehran on February 1st and delivered his first public address on February 2nd. What captured my imagination in his speech when he took over the reins of the country was his emphasis on cinema. It was surprising for me that he did so. Excoriating what he called the Shah's cinema as a den of prostitution, Khomeini encouraged the creation of a new cinema, one that would wash out the eyes and unstop the ears, and thus restore the sensorium of the Iranian people. I read Kiarostami's, I read Kiarostami's subsequent revisions of First Case, Second Case. He began filming it again about 6 months later and completed it. I read these revisions as a kind of contestatory response to the new leader of what was renamed by him the Islamic Republic of Iran. And to his understanding of the sensorium. There have been many essays and at least one play and a highly influential book on what the author of the latter, the book, calls the struggle for the soul of the Iranian people, which was fought between the French Islamicist Henry Corbin and Khomeini. Corbin, if you don't know, he was a contemporary of Lacan's and sometimes collaborator. I take the side of Corbin, whose work has helped me read not only Kiarostami's films, but also make connections between Islamic philosophy and not only Lacan, but psychoanalysis in general. I understood from the start that there was no audience for anything that I would write about these three, this knot of discourses, and that it was my job to try to create one. I learned the hard way how difficult it was to do so in a single paper. Despite my conviction that the paper I will not read today was successful, after all, I had the facts on the ground on my side. It still left 3 audiences perplexed. So the paper is too long. It has, and so I had to edit it each time I gave it, and I edited it in different ways. And in doing so, I always had to leave the explanation of either cinematic terms or cinematic terms in history, Arabic terms and concepts, and Lacanian terms on the cutting room floor. So this paper approaches some of the central issues raised by this 3-ring knot, Kiarostami, Corbin, Lacan, or cinema, Islamic philosophy, and psychoanalysis, from a point further back and leaves aside longer, necessary arguments. It attempts to pique interest in my inquiry rather than perplex. But perhaps the 2 things are not so different. Okay, so this is kind of a strategy much like Adrian's, but it's as if an introduction, although it's an introduction after I have already written all the other chapters. Okay. So it's going to be much more on the cinematic. There's always has to be some way that I get through, and each time I go through, starting it's more psychoanalysis or more Islamic theory or more cinema. Today it's more cinema because that's easiest. Okay. Bread and Alley, which was made in 1970. Is Abbas Kiarostami's first film. It was made at Kanun, a cultural organization founded in 1965 by the wife of the Mohammed Reza Shah. That's what it was. A short 10-minute film, a black and white film. It features a young boy who was obliged to negotiate his way past a menacing-looking dog. The film is devoid of dialogue, its only sound that of the extra-diegetic Beatles song, Oobla-dee, Oobla-da, which accompanies the carefree pre-dog sighting stride of the boy, only to disappear and resume again after he manages to deflect the canine threat. It is a sweet film, simple and straightforward on its surface, yet it bears a heavy burden, not only because Kiarostami referred to it as the mother of all his films. For others, too, it is heralded as the beginning of the Kiarostami aesthetic and paradigm, which is described as realistic in that it presents a vision of the world uncluttered by metaphysical ideas and remains focused on a minor incident involving a protagonist, solitary and single-minded, reliant solely on his stubborn will and ingenuity that permits him to overcome the challenges he confronted. While it is acknowledged that in later films, the protagonists are not always young nor male, and often tend to be less irresistibly likable or capable of resolving problems, these exceptions do nothing to address the larger misconceptions embedded in the first account. There is, I argue, a considerable distance between Bread and Alley's intent and the one attributed to it. That Kiarostami is a humanist or a realist in the ordinary sense, that he was indifferent to the plight of women or turned his back on his own culture and countrymen, making films for export, that he failed to acknowledge, let alone confront, the stifling political circumstances that were choking the country, or take Iran's leaders and policies to task, That these criticisms are unfounded can only be refuted by reading the films themselves. One might begin with the acute observations made by Yusuf Ishapur. This is a book which has never been translated into English for some odd reason. His book on Kiarostami. In a single clipped but insightful passage, he puts his finger on a significant turning point in Kiarostami's filmmaking, where others are more inclined to observe only the continuities which are also there. Ishapur identifies this consequential turn by offering a comparison of an early film, The Traveler, which was made in 1974, to Where is the Friend's House, made in 1987, and the film that established Kiarostami's reputation worldwide. Both films were made at Canoon. Both feature a resourceful and resolute young schoolboy who will stop at nothing to accomplish his task. And both are set in an Iranian village with narrow, winding paths littered with obstacles to be overcome. Yet the two films are literally worlds apart. Here is how Ishapur describes the difference. In The Traveler, the places, the streets, the house, the school, serve as the setting of the story, while in Where is the Friend's House, they become, through their repetition, states. And Ishapur just puts states in quotes. He doesn't explain it, but he puts it in quotes because in what it means philosophically, according to Islamic philosophy, is something like a predicament, a point where someone faces the unknown. So they become, through their repetition, states. The world is the site of an action. Where is the Friend's House? The action takes place in a world. This shift distinguishes the Occidental mimesis from the Persian miniature. In the Occidental tradition, a universe is dominated by man and his action, which determines the meaning of the world, while in the Persian miniature, there is a world more important than man, whose actions are not determining, and history is of little importance. Details and their rhythmic ornamental organization manifest another dimension. Let's call it paradisical. Okay, that's the end of the quote from Ishapur. The distinction Ishapur draws between the films suggests that Kiarostami in the later work was able to refine his Oriental aesthetic, an aesthetic that one may have evaded not only the perception of Western audiences, but Iranians as well. One must be careful, however, not to lose Ishapur's point by orientalizing what is meant by Oriental. We must avoid falling prey to the cliched understanding of this other aesthetic. It has been noted, for example, that Kiarostami had a penchant for philosophical long takes, in which the actors and their action are visually diminished in scale as the camera pulls back to regard them from afar. These shots can be seen to invoke Persian miniatures. But what does this mean? An average Orientalist reading of these shots would contrast the Occidental privileging of the individual with an Oriental absorption of individuals in a larger whole. This precipitous opposition breezes past without noting the complications that deflect it. The distinction Ishapur makes is precise. It contrasts the world of the traveler, which serves as the setting of the story, with a world that is to say, an indeterminate world, which appears in Where is the Friend's House. In the first case, the world is closed, finite, and the human drama must thus either be contained within it, which would be a historicist reading, or heroically, ruggedly alone. The hero faces off against it by transcending its limits. This would be a humanist reading. Kiarostami's films are neither of these, and his films, as Ishapur contends, take place in an indeterminate world. While it would not be incorrect to detect in Where is the Friend's House a kind of Persian miniaturization of the human drama that unfolds, it is imperative to understand this correctly. Here is what the film is not asking us to believe. While young Ahmed may, through persistence and cleverness, manage to dodge various obstacles in order to save his schoolmate from censure, his victories are small beer in the larger scheme of things. The Orientalist error resides in the assumption that the other dimension is not a place from which human actions may be judged or measured as relatively trivial. Here is a problem with this interpretation. This world, as we noted, is indeterminate. It cannot be located at a measurable distance from the human drama. True, Ishapur speaks of a world more important than man, but his argument makes no sense at all unless one takes him to mean more important than man conceived in isolation from this dimension. The salient point is not that the other dimension bears witness to the impotence of human action. The point is rather that this other dimension falls within man, buried or occulted there. It thus falls to him to disoccultate it. The great advance of Where is the Friend's House lies in the fact that it makes this indeterminate vastness evident through young Ahmed. A simple synopsis of the films exposes the way their overt parallels are rendered by formal divergences as Kiarostami's cinema takes shape. In the early film, Kasem sneaks out in the dead of night and heads to Tehran to attend a live soccer match. Although he finds his way to the stadium without any trouble, the arduous journey tires him. He falls asleep and thus misses the match. In the later film, Ahmed slips away from his village to look for a neighboring one in order to return a notebook to a friend who lives there. While he arrives at the destination where an elderly guide guides him, he will find the house of the friend, but tells him he will find the house of the friend. Ahmed declines to knock at the door and deliver the notebook to its owner. These differences are far from slight. Kasem makes a one-way journey from his village to the stadium, while Ahmed crosses back and forth between his and the neighboring village twice, without any narrative motivation. This repetition opens within the abstract temporality of the narrative, a time or dimension of time that does not clock the progress of the narrative. The forward propulsion toward the goal slackens as events begin to transpire less on the level of the narrative than somewhere else. It is as if another dimension had opened up, a surplus somewhere created through repetition. The central action, and here again, Ishapur puts it in quotes without explaining why, but I presume it is to distinguish it from narrative actions. The film ceases to belong to the order of narrative facts and opens another order. While the failure of Kasem to fulfill his desire to see a live football match is explicable in terms provided by the narrative, that is to say, his exhausting journey takes a toll on him, and he falls asleep and therefore misses the game. But the hesitation that prevents Ahmed from accomplishing his objective is given no physiological, psychological, or any other alibi. How then to understand the retreat of Ahmed from this his thus far obsessively pursued goal? It is clear that the flat horizontal logic of narrative, cause and effect, loses much of its fascination as the other dimension produced via repetition emerges in it. The act of friendship Ahmed wishes to perform cannot and will not be accomplished by returning the book he acquired in error, nor will he come face to face with his friend on the threshold of the latter's door. These solutions are ruled out by the film because the accomplishment of the act does not depend on a simple reciprocity or the making good of a prior loss. But what strikes me as uncommonly curious is the stubbornness of a negativity that seems to attach itself to the image of the house at which Ahmed arrives not once but twice, as if to mark this dwelling as twice wrong. That this is not the right house is clear, for we discover during the first arrival, along with Ahmed, that it belongs to another boy whose pants are hanging on the clthesline. The second arrival does not dispute the correctness of our earlier conclusion, and thus the house's unimpeached wrongness remains inexplicable unless we conclude that it is not only the narrative destination, but more fundamentally the image that is at stake here. What is astonishing about the scene is that it makes us witnesses of the image's failure to declare this is the friend's house. Film theorists will recall that Christian Metz, in an attempt to clarify the way cinema could be said to function as a language, insisted that individual images ought to be regarded not as words, but as statements. An image of a revolver, for example, should be taken as a declaration, this is a revolver. Far from implying that the image fails in its task, that it is weak or unreliable, the image in the films of Kiarostami refuse to bow down or make themselves subservient to reality. In brief, the primary aim of the image in his cinema is not denotative, but propelled by a deictic, not propelled by a deictic intention. My argument runs parallel to and takes many cues from the one forwarded by Nancy's book on Kiarostami, which is called The Evidence of Film, and where evidence resists reduction to any probative or documentary enterprise, and the notions of language and the image are no longer charged with the task of making themselves transparent to facts. Rather than pointing to objects existing in the world, evidence indicates or manifests an unseen. The strongest confirmation of this central thesis is embedded in Kiarostami's description of his work as an engagement in the art of subtraction. We create, the director said in an interview, not by adding, but by subtracting. The significance of this appellation is in danger of getting lost by the fact that it is so obviously accurate. In all of Kiarostami's films, narrative action is pared down to a rare minimum. Motivations are in short supply, and conversations riddled with silences. There are, in addition, all those unignorable holes in the ground, a plethora of sculpted underground spaces. Up to this point, Kiarostami's attempt to wash out our eyes is easily confused with the minimalist projects of modernism in general, which had also become fed up with the piled up density of denotation. One must dig deeper, however, to understand the way subtraction relates to Kiarostami's strong definition of the image. It helps to recall that the term with which Kiarostami characterizes his work reaches back to a pre-modern distinction made by Leonardo da Vinci between two contrasting ways of making art, via addition or via subtraction. The avenue of investigation leads, inevitably in my estimation, to Freud, who evoked this distinction several times at the beginning of his career with the express purpose of aligning his new psychoanalytic method emphatically with the latter term. In On Psychotherapy, for example, Freud borrows the distinction in order to set psychoanalysis apart from the technique of suggestion, which in psychoanalysis was intent on displacing. I quote from Freud. Painting, says Leonardo, works by addition, for it applies a substance, particles of color, where there was nothing before, on the colorless canvas. Sculpture, however, proceeds via subtraction, since it takes away from the block of stone all that hides the surface of the statue contained in it. While the technique of suggestion aims at proceeding by addition, it is not concerned with the origin, strength, or meaning of the morbid symptoms, but supposes something, a suggestion, in the expectation that it will be strong enough to restrain the pathogenic idea from coming to expression. Analytic therapy, on the other hand, does not seek to add anything new, but to take away something, to bring something out. And to this end, it concerns itself with the genesis of the morbid symptoms, which it seeks to remove. Freud might have said this better later in his career, but we can sort out what he intends to say, knowing where his argument will take us and what is eventually at stake. His reproach is, to earlier methods of treatment may sound mild, but it cuts to the quick. He accuses them of covering up or concealing the unconscious. He says this almost in these words. The suggestive technique, he says literally, conceals from us all insight into mental forces. It does not permit us, for example, to recognize the resistance to which the patient clings to his disease and thus even fights against his own recovery. If I insist on pointing out that he almost states his position, it is because he does not explicitly mention the unconscious at this point and even appears to dodge it in his characterization of the art of addition as operating on nothing before on a blank canvas. This depiction is misleading from the perspective of the art of subtraction. This prior nothing is far from trivial or benign. The nothing at issue here is what Freud would name the unconscious. If the exposition, and I know I'm speaking after Lorenzo's talk, great talk. If the exposition of his argument is less clear than it could be, it is because Freud begins descriptively, thus seeming to lend credence to the proposition that there are two ways of making art, while he actually ends up invalidating the first, the art of addition, as less than useless. The polemical argument places larger issues at stake, not only the means of obtaining therapeutic effects, but also inevitably sublimation, and as Lacan will make clear still, the function of the symbolic, given the fact that therapeutic effects are procured through the latter. Rather than pursue this inevitable whirl of consequences, let me focus on the psychoanalytic art of subtraction. One point stands out almost immediately. If the art of addition is an art of covering up, the opposing art of subtraction cannot be said to be an art of exposure. This is so, once again, because what is at issue is the unconscious, which cannot be exposed or dragged out of hiding. For repression cannot be drawn down, and thus the unconscious cannot be emptied of its hiddenness, of its concealment. The task to which the art of subtraction, the task to which the art of subtraction is thus double. It must not only put an end to the obscurantist agenda, the recalcitrant wanting to know nothing about it, but it must do so without exposing it. It must, to evoke Nancy's term, once again, give evidence of it. Kiarostami's art, I argue, is not minimalist, but an art of plenitude, of expansion. It attempts to restore to the world its fullness. This can be gleaned through explication with the assistance of psychoanalysis. So, question of God and the unconscious comes up. I've edited this. All right. On the basis of this, this is a proposition. On the basis of this being my belief and this interpretation of the art of subtraction, I am at odds with a lot of what has been written about Kiarostami, and what I'm going to finish with is the four points at which I'm at odds with a lot of work done, and why. The first is veiling. The veiling, the first approach taken by feminists, and I admit that this is true of me as well. What interested me at first was the fact that the women in the films were veiled, and that it radically altered what could be shot in the film and what realism meant. And because if you film, for example, a woman in a domestic setting, she doesn't have to be veiled. But it's not. But it's not simply the diegetic element that is important. There's the extra diegetic element too, which is to say that there are camera people there, there are the cameramen there, and so the woman has to be veiled. So that is just one of the most obvious ways in which Iranian cinema is affected, but there are many more ways. So the veiling, and that interests me initially. Okay, so It's not only the veiling of women, but the entire modesty system. Most feminists interested in Iranian cinema in general tended to regard the veiling of women and the entire modesty system as a positive turn, insofar as it provided women a safe harbor from the objectifying look of leering women. This was the surprise that Laura Mulvey, who invented the concept of the male gaze, was supportive of this film. I mean, rightfully so to support and write about these films, as a number of other British feminists did. But the reasoning, I don't quite agree with. Okay. It provided a safe harbor. So the argument was that the fact that the women are veiled, that we make these films, one couldn't have a close-up of a woman, for example, in the early days of this new Iranian cinema. So there was, and she was not the object of a objectifying look. So that is what was praised by most feminists who were interested in these films. Okay, so let me start again. The veiling of women in the entire modesty system is a positive term inasmuch as it provides women a safe harbor from the objectifying look of leering men. It was argued that the removal from the field of vision by being veiled freed women for action by allowing them to pass freely, that is, unseen, in society where they would comfortably work alongside men. While many insightful analyses of Iranian cinema were born of this impulse, there is, to my mind, a serious weakness in it. It fails to acknowledge the non-trivial difference between a veiling that aims to occult or completely cover up something, and a translucent veil that gives evidence of something behind it. That the draconian modesty system, which punished women for allowing a lock of hair to peek out from under her hijab, or for dancing because her movements would indicate the shape of her body under her clothes, was not designed to empower women to allow her to pass freely through society, not to my mind, at least. Nor am I persuaded by the argument that this system had in itself the unintended consequence of empowering women by allowing them to participate in the larger society. Its intention and actual effect is the cloistering of women, cutting them off from society. What it aims to occult is sexuality itself, which is in any case invisible, known only through its effects, and never in itself. For from psychoanalysis, we learn that sexuated being, that being which opens onto social being or being in relation to others, is I do nevertheless take seriously the feminist criticisms of the objectification of the image of women and will thus address that concern by turning back to the question of the image, its function in film and in reality. Okay, so that's veiling. Here's the image, the second point. Kiarostami dwells on this question of the image, which is a constant in his cinema, thematically and aesthetically. Beginning with The Traveler. In order to raise money to attend the soccer match, Kasem hits on a scheme. He will offer to photograph the other boys in the neighborhood for a bit of cash. Never mind that his camera is defunct and that there is no film in it, the offer proves irresistible. All the boys line up to pay for an image of themselves, smiling into Kiarostami's functional and obliging camera, which grants them their wish, the wish that Kasem cannot fulfill. So although on the level of diegesis, it can't be, this wish isn't being fulfilled, Kiarostami obliges this desire and films the young boys. It would be fair to say that according to Kiarostami, the whole world has just one wish, because this begins this idea that everyone wants an image of themselves, begins with this early film, The Traveler, but you see it consistently throughout his film, and the close-up is one of his probably most famous films. The close-up is about that, the desire to have an image. The whole world has just one wish, being photographed, appearing in a film, being on the screen. Why should women be exempt from this elemental desire to have an image? A desire so elemental that even the God of Islam is acknowledged to have pined for one, hidden even from himself for want of an image. Those who protest the assimilation of women to an image are right to do so, though it needs to be acknowledged that they are protesting against the image in its vulgar or opaque form. This form freezes what it depicts and leads to its objectification or to idolatry. The strong or incorruptible form of the image, on the other hand, has an epiphanic function. It commands us to attend not merely to what it shows on its surface, but also to what it does not show or keeps under wraps. The most famous illustration of this image is, of course, the painting of Parrhasius of a veil on the wall, which called all those who looked upon it to ask what lay beneath it. That is to say, the function of the image in this case is not to draw our attention to what is, but to what evades sight. Here I feel obliged to recall Ibn Arabi's conception of love as a nearness that is so excessive that it acts at first like a veil. Recalling my earlier negative claim that the image in Kiarostami cinema does not function didactically, I am now in a position to formulate the positive claim I offer instead. Rather than pointing to a referent, a reality already out there in the world, the image in its strong sense manifests something that exceeds the jurisdiction of the visible for two reasons. It is excessively close, too close to objectify, and at the same time, it is inexistent. Kiarostami is like someone in love. This 2012 film, filmed in Japan, advertises in the first word of its title the engagement with this conception of the image. The notion of likeness, of resemblance, is interrogated throughout the film, and no more pointedly than when the supremely enigmatic female character, Akiko, blurts out, "Not a day goes by that I'm not told that I look like someone." The oblique reference to someone cancels itself out, or better said, it assigns to resemblance a peculiar intransitive sense. For what it says about Akiko is that she resembles no one we can point to at least of all herself. Once again, however, this argument is more accurately stated in positive terms. She resembles herself insofar as she is not identical to herself. She holds together as a subject only on the condition that she is irreducible to a set of traits that objectify her. In Avicenna and the Visionary Recital, Henry Corbin analyzes a literary form to which he gives the name recital. His claim is that the recital form presents the world not as an abstract magnitude, but as a lived reality, and does so by making itself the repository of the image. Each of us carries as our unique expression. The image singularizes the subject by according the latter a surplus that cannot be found in the abstract universe of rationally constructed systems where it remains concealed beneath didactic demonstrations and impersonal developments. I've severely edited this, so Kiarostami answers in film, to which we can only respond, how? How does this? Yeah. Yeah. What sticks out is his claim that the image precedes perception and transcends expression. And the question we have to ask is how? Kiarostami answers in film after film. One must deploy a bit of flim-flam. Some contraption or apparatus of dissimulation, some feint, is necessary to make what is unavailable to sight visible. The recital form, as defined by Corbin and invented by Avicenna and Suravardi, relies on linguistic devices to accomplish this feat. Is it too obvious to point out that this is the same conclusion to which Freud came when, at the end of his essay on the uncanny, he explains that his nearly exclusive recourse to literature throughout the essay was mandated by the fact that literature has at its disposal devices for making visible what is otherwise invisible. Throughout history, the apparatus that is most often deployed in the service of this demonstrative deception has undoubtedly been the mirror, and one of the best instances of this particular use of the mirror is the one deployed in paintings rendered in Renaissance perspective. In the origin of Renaissance perspective, Hubert Damisch underscores Brunelleschi's description of perspective as a structure of exclusion, that is, as a structure of construction that function only on condition that everything escaping its jurisdiction be excluded from its field. Damisch argues that this meant that a vast, unmasterable background could not enter paintings in perspective except via a ruse, more precisely by the use of a mirror, that would allow what was heterogeneous to the space and therefore unfigurable in it to appear in the form of a reflection. The films of Kiarostami do not present themselves as an apparatus-free zone. Far from pretending to be innocent of technological intervention, they place camera crews, the entire cinematic apparatus in plain sight and flaunt the dissimulation in which they engage. In his final film, 24 frames, made in 2017 and finished by his son, for example, still images are visibly manipulated by digital CGI and other means to animate them or cause movement to appear in them. This overt meddling is not meant to unveil the hoax they perpetrate as a hoax, as in the modernist notion of bearing the device or revealing a scam. The films do not set out to expose a lie, but proffer one in order to get at a truth. Dissimulation is deemed necessary in order to sneak into the film evidence of what escapes capture in it, what withdraws from sight. Here, the image does not produce a duplicitous double or diminished second by creating a copy of an original. It responds instead to an imperative. What is there, what is not there, must be shown not to be there. It manifests an inaccessible proximity that decompletes the one. This requires the rigging of a device which, through its creation of an oblique angle of incidence, allows what is not there to come into view. Okay, that Kiarostami's film weave together documentaries and fictions, truth and lies, or flim-flam is well known, but it requires better explanation. Sometimes it seems, as in first case, second case, the film I'm not talking about, that real life events here, the Iranian Revolution, hijacked the film Kiarostami was in the midst of making, or others, Close Up, for example, where the film hijacks actual events unfolding in the news and alters the outcome. But in these and in all others, fiction and reality are so finely intertwined that it is impossible to say where one begins and the other leaves off. The influential essay, Kiarostami's Uncertainty Principle, by Laura Mulvey, deals with the implication of these terms very deftly. She argues through analyses of several films that spectators are compelled to assume a conscious sense of uncertainty about the truth or reality of what seems to be happening. I do not disagree with this description as far as it goes, but I insist that the Kiarostami's principle is a principle of certainty. Why? I have already stated my answer. The films proceed from subtraction, which assigns itself the task of manifesting this subtraction rather than denying it through procedures of obnubilation or unveiling. Okay, this then leads to my final point. Veil, image, flim-flam, you see how they go together, and this is the most ambitious one. The most ambitious aim of my entire project, which is to align not only Kiarostami's cinema, but also psychoanalysis to the Gnostic tradition that informs the visionary recitals of Avicenna and Suravardi, and begins with Ibn Arabi, the father of the philosophical Gnosticism. Earlier, I alluded to Ibn Arabi's characterization of the experience of love as that of an excessive nearness, which is not a nearness to an external object, but to oneself, a pure esoteric distance. In life, like Someone in Love, it is Akiko's self-love that is at issue in the film, and the film is incomprehensible if one does not take her inadequation or pure difference from herself into account. While the film seems to be absorbed with the question of the image and aesthetics exclusively to connect, it aims, I propose, to connect the image to the body. While Gnosticism is commonly taken to be a theory of man's fallenness from grace, as an inability to attain higher knowledge as the result of its incarceration, man's incarceration in his body, Muslim Gnosticism rethinks the body as a site of pleasure through their conceptualization of the relation between man and God. Rather than place divine being above the finite world, they withdrew him from it, set him alone without an image, and thus without any image of himself. He couldn't God couldn't know himself. This created the condition of what Schelling referred to as a non-unilateralist monotheism. Man provided God with an image without which he would have remained unknown to himself. This permitted a modification of the radical pessimism of early Gnostics. For while absolute knowledge of God remained out of reach, it was not because that is, knowledge, was unattainable, but because it was inexhaustible. All of God's images provided knowledge of him. The result, to be very quick, of this was the invention, a very strong notion of the image, which provides knowledge, and a non-denigration of the body, and the invention of a third term, which is not intuitionist, and that term is called the imaginal world, and that world is what in Lacan's language would say, linked man and God, or body and thoughts.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. We can open the discussion. Yes.
I had a question. Am I audible? Okay. I had a question about your broader project because you'd mentioned at a few points that the films do not set out to expose a lie.
Sorry, can you just speak a little bit
louder? Okay. I just had a question about your broader project because you mentioned a few times that the films do not set out to expose a lie and the images don't, kind of make a copy or a duplicitous double. And here, given that you're reviewing the works in Kiarostami's over, I wanted to ask sorry? Oh, okay. I wanted to ask how certified copy fits into your overall project regarding this kind of mirroring, doubling, because I'm thinking here of the cut between the two and how slowly, Juliette Binoche in the mirror comes to reveal that, how slowly the images we see of the two kind of unravel this story. So in comparison to the other films that you've discussed today, I was just wondering how you would incorporate certified copy into your broader project.
Well, just because by its very name, the certified copy, has no original. It really, ties in quite well with this, with the conception of God as having no image. So there's not the first term. Yeah, so it fits well. I was very pleased that he made that film, that it could corroborate, I think, my position. Thank you for allowing me to do that here. Questions? Not enough knowledge of Islamic philosophy in the house.
I will ask you a question, if I may. So, on this notion of subtraction, via which it seems like you're putting together all the three vertices of your project.
Yes.
So both Kiarostami and Lacanian psychoanalysis, Freudian psychoanalysis, and Islamic philosophy. At one point, I was wondering whether you are thinking also a connection between subtraction and undecidability. And I'll be more specific. At the beginning, when you're talking about, like the character going to the alleged friend's house,
yes,
but not being able to find out whether, if I got it right, whether it was indeed. We don't get it. We don't get from the image whether that is it or is it not the friend's house? And
it's not the friend's house because because it's not going to be a house. The house is within Ahmed. It's not a destination or a place. In other words, the idea that the image is not pointing to something else outside. It's not deictic. It's not a deictic image.
Yeah.
It points back to him.
Yeah.
The thing is what Ahmed he has to act, well, Islamic philosophy is said to be, kind of culminate in Mullah Sadra, and you probably, many of you, I hope, read, the book, the Zone book on Mullah Sadra by Christian Jambet. Well, anyway, it's called the act of being. So it culminates in this idea of an act. What's imperative is the act. That's the culmination of the Islamic blood. Something has to be done. Yeah. So Ahmed can't simply deliver the book, and that would be the end of it. He has to do something. And so this Islamic philosophy is called esoteric, but keep in mind that the esoteric never comes without the exoteric, but it insists that there is also an esoteric dimension. It doesn't just say everything is internal, but it's some people make that point, but it is an esoteric philosophy in that sense, and therefore by the that is one means by which I think it is associated with, can be or is associated with psychoanalysis.
I'll try to give an example because I really,
Yeah.
because the example I was trying to use to counter. So, you got you right. A subtractive image does not have a referent, right? But then the question is, this kind of subtractive image is a very specific kind of image that doesn't have a referent. I give you an example, famous example, Magritte and Foucault, right? So yeah. you have a painting of a pipe saying this is not a pipe. Obviously, this is like a negation of the referent, right? By means of language. Whereas here...
Well, it's a lot of things. It's not a pipe. It's not actually... I mean, there's so many levels on that essay. This is not a pipe. This is a piece of paper with a picture of a pipe. It means so many things, and distinguishes the image of the pipe and the word pipe. I mean, it's... Yeah, I don't think it's it's... yeah, but it does have that also, the non-deictic. Yeah.
My question was like, basically, I think Kiarostami is doing something very different from Magritte, very schematically. And
yeah. Well, how else can I mean, it's just, I say, it creates a positive notion of the image. It's not a negative one. That it's not that the image fails to represent reality. That's not its purpose, to represent something that's already existing, but to illuminate something which isn't existing. And then through an act, something new can happen. So it illuminates something that isn't. I mean, I think it really, you can plug in a lot of what you said about this, about the unconscious, and there's points in Lacan's work, especially in Seminar 10. There seems to be a lot of Islamic references in Seminar 20, and when he talks about angel being, when he actually uses the what is the hadith that is most contemplated is, I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known, therefore I created man, to be known, and that and there is no God but God. This is, Lacan uses that in one seminar, so he seems to me quite, so evidence of his knowledge of this Islamic philosophy. Oh, and also his praise of the mystics in Seminar 20, although he among which he counts himself, even though he refers by name only to Western mystics. So.
Thank you so much, Joan. This was fascinating. I have one question, and it's rather a question of clarification for me, I think. Could you say something more about the point with which you ended, and the most ambitious one in your description? And namely, if I understood correctly, the point you made about, let's say, Muslim narcissism was man provided God with an image, and that image is adding a subtraction. That adds a subtraction, right? That adds something because it's productive, but it is, this image is, let's say, the paradigm of the art of subtraction, because it generates an access to that which otherwise would not exist. If I understood that point correctly, but maybe I didn't. Because I was wondering, what is the status of knowledge there? You said, right, you said that it provides knowledge of God, but also knowledge that which it provides knowledge of is inexhaustible, right? So there seems to be two kinds of knowledge that is produced there. Is that correct? Or maybe I just...
No, it's correct, but all right. So I guess it's I don't say anything more. I mean, well, almost to go back to Lorenzo was talking about in Seminar 11 when Lacan talks about the unborn. Corbin talks about the uncreated, and using the same, so that what isn't there, the fact that there isn't something there is the opening for the act to make something there. That's the thing, and that's why Where is the Friend's House a very good example of this. You can see it really playing itself out. The point is not simply to point to the evidence like a documentary film does. Points in the other direction to this inwardness and this absence. This withdrawal. Something is to let the spectator know that something has been withdrawn, and therefore, when something has to be done, an act has to be performed. That's why I emphasize Mullah Sadra, the act of being. That's the name of the book that is published about. He goes. He's considered the culmination of this kind of thing, of this thinking.
More questions?
Thank you. You reminded me of the title of Pierre Bayard's book, How to Talk About Books You Haven't Read.
Yeah.
In the sense that I feel like that we were put in a position, as in your introduction, that how to listen to talk about movies and books you haven't read. And in that line, I would want to ask you, what question would you like to ask yourself?
Yeah, my question I ask myself is
what remains?
How to present this. I mean, how to present all this material, and the only answer is, as I said, it cannot be done in a single paper. What I had to do is write, and I've written many papers trying to cover the territory. As I say, I'm always coming at you. This time I come at it through cinema. If I think people had seen Kiarostami's films, they would have get some sense. But I gave the paper that I didn't deliver at a Corbin conference at Harvard. I thought, oh, surely Surely they. But of course, I was talking about, I talked about cinema, I talked about first case, second case, and they were acousmatic. What's that? You know, because there's an acousmatic sound, and you know, and I also, I could be wrong about my reading of Corbin. So, you know, that's what and I was accused of that. And maybe there's a term, Barzak. They were talking about it. I said, I'm sorry. So please stop talking about it that way because you're acting as though it's a place. And they said, well, what's wrong with that? I said, it's not a place. That's what's wrong with it. It's a limit. And they were, what? Yeah, it's a limit. I said, I'm sorry. I know look like I know nothing, but look, it's a limit, you know. And no one would listen to me, and I went to talk to people and try to explain, really wanting to communicate, because this was the one audience I thought I had Corbin scholars, and they were telling me I was wrong about what Barzak meant, and like, I don't speak Arabic, and so they wouldn't. No one would listen to me. At the end, I went to someone. I said, "Can I make one more point?" And they said, "No, we understand now. You're Lacanian." They found out the next day there were some people that didn't come that were in Paris, and someone said, someone said the Barzak is a negativity, and the smarter people in the room said, "What did you say?" So they understood that there was a different interpretation. But so one question, the question I asked myself and tried to answer by simply writing several essays that somehow together they will make these three rings connect up. I don't know if that's true.
Okay. Thank you very much for your talk. Enjoyable as always, and always, an opportunity to ask many questions, whether they relate directly to your talk but you inspire, threads of reflections which are in a way related or to what you just said. One of the things I was curious and would like to ask you is this parallel that you made between, in reference also to Lacan, especially to his 20th seminar, between mysticism and Islamic philosophy concerning the impossibility of reaching absolute knowledge, and you made a distinction between and you said that it's not about the unattainability of knowledge, but it's not impossible because it is unattainable, but because it is inexhaustible. But to me, at least, the way I've read mysticism is connected. It's because it is inexhaustible, it's unattainable, or maybe you have a different way of developing this link between the two.
I mean, I get the knowledge includes the knowledge that there is something that has been subtracted. That that's a knowledge. It's not simply a confusion. You understand. It's a know that there's not something. A knowledge of there not being something. That's an addition to knowledge of the knowing of things that exist, to know that there's something that doesn't. That's an increase of knowledge. I guess that's how I would say it. It's an increase.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Joan. I just wanted to dwell on something you said about the films of Kiarostami, for instance, Close Up, as pointing to the logic of an artifice, but not by way of critique. You know, it flaunts its dissimulation, I believe that's what you said. Insofar that this is not a modernist gesture. You know, this is not the logic of the Duchampian ready-made or a collage by Hannah Hock. And I was wondering if you could just precisely articulate a little bit more about that, precisely how this gesture is not the gesture of modernism.
Of modernism? I talked about modernism in the context of a kind of a depletion of, details, getting away from this denotative functioning of language. I'm thinking 19th century novels, they have to be so thick because everything has to be described. So it's getting away from that denotative function of language, that there is another, and it's the pointing in the other direction, the esoteric dimension doesn't point to anything existing. I don't know. Yeah. But was there something more that I can?
I mean, when you said, like, for instance, when you see the presence...
what is the relationship to close-up in your mind?
I mean, when you see the presence of the making of the film, literally, the technological presence, or, the fact that this is a film about, the presence of filmmaking within the film, but
but that's not what it's about. It's
right,
not about that.
Sure.
It's not that. So that's what you're asking the modern idea that you bear the device.
Right, and but it's not pointing to a lie. Is that what you were saying? Like, this is not a critique.
It's not that. It's not to expose a lie. No, it's actually the thing is, the filming creates another reality. That's what it literally does. If Kiarostami, it wasn't that this is false because it's just a film and a camera shooting it. The camera produces another reality, which is the fact that Sobsian is let off. He's not put in jail, and also that a film, everyone in the film gets their wish because the film was made. Because what Sobsian was claiming to do, although he didn't have a camera either, he told this family that he was going to make a film about them, and in that way he wanted to have an image. Sobsian wanted to have an image because he's an out-of-work printer. His wife left him. He's nothing. He has no image of himself as a person in the world. And how do you get an image? He doesn't do the right thing. He allows the fact that he was mistaken for Makbabov as a way of getting an image. And what Kiarostami does is to make him not be a director, but to play himself. So he makes all the characters in the film play themselves. So they are doubled in this.
Thank you so much.
Then everyone gets their wish.
We do have time for one final question, maybe. Comments? I was hoping you ask a question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a great opportunity to have you here. The reader of your paper about, of course, Kiarostami cinema and Iranian philosophy. Every time I was impressed. And about Barzakh that you mentioned, I think you are correct. Barzakh, topologically speaking, Barzakh means barrier, it means limit, it means hindrance. And it's a place between, let's say, this world and hereafter. And but I just I want to refer to your article entitled Kiarostami and Capitalism.
Which one?
Kiarostami and Capitalism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You made a really interesting point by referring to Levinas' concept of fatigue and Levinas, Heidegger, and then through, let's say, this Levinasian conceptualization of fatigue, you, in your interpretation of the taste of Chori, Kiarostami taste of Chori, you made this point that Kiarostami is actually representing the fatigue of, let's say, capitalism within the Iranian, the Islamic Republic framework in its first decade, something like that. And because Kiarostami is accused of, apolitical, or he's not a political filmmaker, he's not dealing with politics. I just want, if my question directly is, would you please make more elaboration of this link between the taste of Chori and fatigue and capitalism,
Oh, well, that would be...
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean...
Because
go
fatigue, in our, let's say, contemporary, world, fatigue is one of the main, let's say, it's the name of the effect, of, let's say, living under this brutal capitalism. Fatigue is just moving around. It's the proliferation of fatigue. I just want to, because, at the time, in early 80s, in Iran, capitalism was not, advanced to produce these, let's say, this fatigue machinery with which we are, grappling in our, contemporary world. What is the difference between that kind of fatigue? You contextualize it within capitalist, Iranian, let's say, situations, sociopolitical situation, and our contemporary fatigue.
All right, let me tell you what, I cannot do it all here, but Corbin's essay, this is important, that he read, when I say that there was a struggle for the soul of Iran, this is the argument, there was Corbin versus Khomeini. And the essay, and if I like the other paper, because it's actually, it's playing itself on the ground, as I say, there is this struggle. Corbin delivers this lecture, Apophatic Theology and, Apophatic Theology as an antidote to nihilism. Yes. And then he dies months after giving that lecture, and he gives that lecture in Tehran, and it's a question about the West in that part of the world because of West toxification and the washing out your eyes and unstopping your. This is the the cry of the Jalal, whatever, yeah. Okay, that notion of West toxification. So that's what Khomeini is saying. We are intoxicated by, debilitated by the West and capitalism, basically. Although, of course, what happened with Khomeini is, instead of raising up the downtrodden. He really made, deals with the, middle class. But anyway, the way that Corbin formulates his argument is by he makes there this distinction between the West and the East that other people wouldn't do, and he sets himself against nihilism, against not wanting to know something about nihilism is not wanting to know about the other, and so yeah, I at several points in the other argument I make, I use that argument because he is saying that. He dies. Khomeini comes, makes his comments about cinema, and you put them together, you really get, this is, I think my whole logic comes from those two, that lecture by Corbin and the address that Khomeini made to the nation. I think the two of them together. And it is about, West toxification and capitalism, I think, go hand in hand in that. That's the shortest way I could say to put it.
Okay, please join me in thanking John for a great lecture.